All right, in this episode, I'm going to make a table saw crosscut sled. Now, for me, there's a catch, and the catch is that I can only use my table saw and one cordless drill for this build. The reason why is because I'm going to tie this video into another video where you're welcome to use any tools at your disposal. I just have a restriction for this build. So with that said, let's get dirty. So I've got a 1/2-inch piece of birch plywood. I've got some 1x4s cut on the table saw to 33 inches, and I've got this extra piece here, and I'm going to use this piece to make my rails. So the first thing that I need to do is, of course, get these rails cut. Now, the way I'm going to do that is, it is right now, so it's too wide to fit in there. So I'm just going to bring my fence over, put this up against the blade, and then I'm just going to run it back through. Now, by doing that, because I put force on it against the blade, when I run this through, it's just going to shave just a little portion of this top part off. Okay, so you can see how that works. I just basically shaved a little piece off, and then I'm going to fit it, and it still doesn't fit. So it's going to actually take me a few shaves to get this to fit in there perfectly. So I'm just going to keep using the same process where I push it up against the blade and then set the rip vents. So basically that's just shaving a little bit off. Now when I get closer, I'm going to use a different method, but right now it's still got a ways to go. So I'm just going to continue doing the shaves until I get closer, and then I'll show you how I'm going to do it so I can just get micro cuts out of it. Okay, so it is ready. It fits, but it's really, really tight. I mean, to a point where it's really hard to push. So I'm ready to do the micro cuts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a couple sets of just 3 playing cards. And that's how I'm going to do the micro cuts. So I'm going to set the playing cards up against the fence and load them all in, and then push that through. Now that will give me my micro cut. Okay, so it took one pass with the playing cards, and this thing fits in there just perfect with a great slide. So the next thing I want to do is I want to cut a piece, and I want to make sure that it is at this depth, the depth of my slide here. So I'm just going to take a combination square, and I'm going to set it at that depth. So that is my depth right there. Okay, so now I have that depth. Now I need to set the table saw blade to that depth, but I need it on the inside of the blade. So I'm just going to line it up against my rip fence and then use this piece here to line it up against the side of the blade. Okay, so I got it set. Let's check that depth. All right, so that is exactly what I need. That is perfect. Now what I can do is I do feel a spot where it does actually come up just a little bit. So I'm just going to take my orbital sander and smooth that out. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and cut the second piece, and then I'll do the orbital sander. Wow, those are a really nice fit. All right, so now I got it. And again, I can feel just a couple little areas where it's kind of popping up. Let's make sure it's just not sawdust causing that. All right, so I have them set the way I want them. Now what I want to do is I'm just going to, again, take the orbital sander and just go over this so it's nice and flush with the table saw. All right, so those are absolutely stunning. I'm going to remove these, set them aside. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the base. So I cut my sides at 33 inches. So I'm going to cut the base at 33 inches also. Now I have a 2 foot by 4 foot piece of 1/2 inch birch. So I'm just going to use my rip fence and just go ahead and buzz it through at 33 inches. So scratch that. My rip fence only goes to 32 inches before it falls off. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it at 32 inches instead of 33. You know, I could turn it around. Yeah, I'm going to do that. All right, so it's 48. I'm just going to cut 15 inches off. But I'm going to cut it on the back side of the blade. So I know that my 33 inches is true. All right, so that's perfect. It came out for 33 by cutting 15 inches off the edge versus trying to get a 33-inch cut. The next thing I want to do is I want to attach my rails. Now, I'm going to attach them. I'm not going to center the board because I want the board to touch these two rails here just to give it more support. So I'm going to kind of off-center it and put it just like this. So what I want to do is I want to set my rip fence right there because I'm going to use my rip fence to help me square this up. I know my I know my blade's at 0 and I know my rip fence is a perfect 90. So by using that, I've got a square already set up. So now I want to put the rails on. Okay, so I have it set up where I want it. I'm going to slide the rails in, and I want them to protrude about 1 inch. All right, so now that I have them where I want them, I'm just going to draw a couple lines because that's where I'm going to cut them. Okay, so I've got them cut. I put them back in the table saw. Let me lower the blade. All right, so now that they're cut to the size I want, I'm going to put a very light bead of glue on each one. Oh, and if you're wondering, yes, my restrictions allow me to use wood glue. So don't think I'm cheating here. All right, so now I can just line it up. And push it down. All right, so the next thing I want to do, I want to put about 4 screws into this. And I want it in the center of the slides. So I'm just going to draw a line on each one right here in the center. So now I need some pilot holes and I want to countersink them. But I can only use one drill. So I'm going to have to switch out bits. Now again, if you're building this, you can use whatever tools you have at your disposal. These are the restrictions I'm following for, again, another video that I'm going to be posting. All right, so I have my 4 pilot holes. Now I'm going to switch out into my countersink. And I'm going to do a very light countersink on each one of them. All right, so I got my countersinks done. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to put 3/4 inch screws on all 4 of these holes So I'm going to go grab the Phillips bit off another one of my drills. So now that the screws are in, I can remove it. And now we can get ready to apply the front bracer and the back bracer. So the one thing that we have to make sure of on the front bracer is that it is perfectly square. Because believe me, that is important when it comes to the cross cutting. So make sure you use a square to check the lumber to make sure it doesn't have any warps in it. Okay, so that piece is good. Now what I want to do is I'm going to make a mark at 3/4 of an inch. So that is where I'm going to set my front bracer, is 3/4 of an inch up. Now that 3/4 of an inch is going to allow me to put a piece of wood here that will kind of make it uncomfortable for my thumbs. It, kind of a limit on where my thumbs can go, because I do not want them here. So I want something that tells me, hey, put your thumbs here, and this is as far as they can go. So I'm going to use just a regular 3/4 inch piece on that, just as a safety measure. So again, I'm not putting my thumbs in the way of the blade. Okay, so I'm just going to throw a large piece of wood under here just to lift this monster up and get it off the table, so that way I can work on it. Okay, so I have this piece lined up with the square. It looks good. I don't have any spacing there. So I've got myself a pretty square piece of lumber here. I do have it lined up against these back 3/4 inch marks that I drew. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to glue it, clamp it, and let it dry before I put screws in it. So it's going to kind of be an overnight process. So I'm going to get that done now. Now when I'm clamping these, that piece of wood cannot move. So I make sure as I'm clamping it that I'm checking it to make sure that it's still lined up with the dots or with the marks that I had made here at the bottom. All right, so I put these 3 clamps on, and I realized, and it just hit me, that these 3 clamps are outside of my restriction. But because they are necessary for what the next video is going to be, I'm going to have to modify my restriction on these clamps. So I'm going to actually have to add them to the list. So, but otherwise, yeah, so I got these 3 clamps on, and I'm going to let this sit overnight, and then I'm going to put some, probably some 2.5 inch screws, maybe, yeah, I'm going to put some 2.5 inch screws in here. And then I'm also going to make a piece that I can put here for my thumbs. So, again, something that restricts my thumbs from being able to go here, and we'll just keep them in this vicinity here. All right, so it's dry. I'm going to take it off, and I'm going to flip it over. And now what I want to do is I'm going to put about, let's see, I'm going to put about 4, probably 5 screws in the base here now that the glue is dried. But I want to make sure when I do this that I'm not putting a screw right where the blade's going to hit. So actually I'm going to flip it back over and just kind of use this as make myself a mental note. So I just did a quick drawing to say, okay, this is where the blade is. And then that will tell me, do not put a screw there. Okay, so now I'm going to use a combination square. I'm just going to kind of set me a center line with the combination square. Alright, so that'll be my center line right there. I'm going to do the same for this side. So then I'm just going to take a quick measurement with the first line I drew. And we're looking at about 1 and a little bit over 1/4. So I'm going to set one more screw right here, and I'm just going to mark that one because it's only going to have one screw. So I'm just switching out my bit. Because again, I'm stuck with just being able to use one drill. And I'm going to put some pilot holes in here. Switch out my bit again because I need to countersink those. I don't want the screw heads to scratch up my table saw. Okay, I'm going to throw the T25 bit on. And I'm going to put some 2.5-inch screws in here. Alright, so the last piece I want to throw on is I'm just going to throw this, I'm just going to call it my safety piece. So this is a piece that basically tells me where to put my hands, and it keeps my thumbs away from this area right here. It measured out to 9.5 inches. So I'm going to just screw this with some 1 5/8 inch screws. Probably put 3 of them in. And again, I gotta make sure that I miss that line for the blade. So I'm going to put those 3 screws in. Actually, I'll put a little glue on it and then put the screws in. Alright, so I transferred my cut line up here. All that's showing me is just do not put any screws in this vicinity here all the way up. So I'm going to put 1, 2, 3 screws 1 5/8 into this and secure it to this board right here. So I'm going to go down halfway. So I just set my combination square for 1 3/4 inches. Alright, so I got my 3 areas. Got to switch out my bits. Now I switched out for the countersink. So I changed my mind on the screws. I'm going to use 1 1/4 inches, not 1 5/8 inches. I just think with the, as far down as I countersink, I think the tips might poke out. So I'm going to switch out from the 1 1/4 inches versus 1 5/8 inches. Alright, so the last piece I want to put on is I'm going to put on this back brace here. And I don't need to make any space for this because I don't have anything where I'm worried about my hands or anything. So I'm going to mount it up. I made the marks on this piece of wood saying, you know, do not put screws here or else you're going to jack your blade. So I'm just going to go ahead and get this mounted. This one will not need to sit overnight. Because it's highly important that you have your front piece perfectly square. This back piece, it doesn't matter if it's square, because all it's doing is it's just basically creating some strength on the back side. You know, you're not going to be using it to cut any wood. So I'm not overly worried if it's square. I know there is a very slight warp to it. I may try and fix that with a clamp when I screw it in, but if I don't fix it perfectly, I'm not going to worry about it. So my first objective is I'm going to get some glue on here. I'm going to grab my large piece of wood and I'm just going to mount it up. So once I have it where I want it, I'm just going to throw a couple 6-inch clamps on here. And even though this piece doesn't need to be perfect, you know, your OCD kicks in and you still want to make it perfect anyways. Alright, so I'm just going to use a combination square. And I'm going to get myself 5 holes drilled here. It's about the halfway mark. Okay, now I'm hitting it with the countersink. And I was putting in the countersink and I seem to have found a air pocket here. The countersink almost went completely through, so I just countersinked next to it and that hole was okay. and that won't affect anything. It was just really weird when I pushed the countersink down that it just basically sunk into the plywood. Alright, so on this one I'm just going to throw some 1 5/8" screws in this one. Okay, so there's my crosscut sled for my table saw. Looks pretty good. The next thing I want to do is I want to kind of grease the rails a little bit. It slides great, but I'm going to throw some paste wax on the rails just to give them a little lubrication. I'm going to do both rails here, and this is Howard paste wax. You can get it up at Home Depot. You can also order it online if you need to go that route. But it's just a Canuba beeswax. Smells like lemons, oranges, some sort of citrus. But there we go. So I've got a nice coat of paste wax on there. Oh yeah, much better. That's going to work great. So the last thing we need to do is we are going to need to get our saw blade in here. Now the way to do that is make sure your blade's all the way down, and then I'm just going to turn my saw on and slowly raise it up until it cuts through, and then I'm just going to finish the cut. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and turn my table saw on and then slowly raise the blade. Alright, so there's my crosscut sled. It's pretty much done. I got some sanding to do. I just want to try it out. So I'm just going to throw this piece of wood on here and see how it works. And you probably can't see that, but that is like perfectly square. So I am happy with this build. Again, I'm going to need to sand it down, and I'm going to be sanding it by hand, not with a tool, because that is one of my restrictions in doing this. So there we go. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and like, subscribe, hit the bell icon to be notified of new episodes as they become available. If you're new to the woodworking hobby, check out my Woodworking for Beginners video series. It's a 12-part series, just some basic projects with step-by-step instructions. Just kind of gives you an overview of getting you started for woodworking. If you have any questions, feel free to post them down in the comment section. I will get to them as soon as I can. If you'd like to support my channel, I'll put a link in the description so you can make a donation. Another thing that is really helpful, go ahead and share me on your social media sites. I'd really appreciate that. So until next time, keep it safe.